Despite the massive fireworks display last night after a day of inspiring songs and poetry and the breathless declarations by far too many liberals and even some conservatives that our collective long national nightmare is over, today, the day after the inauguration of Joseph R. Biden, the 46th president of the United States, is just another day in the empire for me. Did you know that just 2 days ago, the inauguration rehearsal was evacuated after a fire broke out at a nearby homeless camp? Now, I got to ask, what are you more concerned with from that question? The fact that the inauguration rehearsal was evacuated over a potential security risk, and you probably didn't even know about it, or that there is a homeless encampment close enough to the U.S. Capitol that anything that happened there would be considered a threat, or that there is a homeless encampment in Washington, D.C. at all? There are wrong answers to that question. And of course, if you don't live in D.C., you don't know that this city is actually much smaller than you think. It's just a little over 68 square miles in size. The city is divided into 4 distinct quadrants and 8 wards spanning those quadrants. The Capitol building and the monument, the White House, and the National Mall are visible pretty much in every quadrant of the city at an elevated vantage point because the city was designed to have the U.S. Capitol as the nexus point that determines the divisions of the city. So the main thoroughfares emanate from the Capitol, and they mark the quadrants. North Capitol Street runs north from the Capitol and divides the northwest section of the city from the northeast section. South Capitol Street runs south and divides southwest and southeast. East Capitol runs exactly where you think it does, east, and divides northeast and southeast. The National Mall abuts the west side of the U.S. Capitol and separates northwest from southwest. So the city is, it's complex, but it's still pretty small. And the 4 quadrants of the city are unique in the most obvious ways: demographics and economics, with the wealthier and whiter residents living mostly in Northwest, probably more middle class and multicultural in Southwest and some of Northeast, and the poorest and most heavily Black population in the other part of Northeast and most of Southeast. Or at least that's how it used to be before gentrification, or as friend of the show Mike from the district called it, the gentrification mafia took over D.C. politics from Marion Barry and neoliberalized everything. Over time, the city has changed so much that there was less and less diversity within the quadrants, with more and more wealthy white people displacing longtime residents who could no longer afford the rising housing prices across the city. Northwest and Southwest and Upper Northeast became wealthier and whiter, while Northeast, closer to the Southeast border, became more densely populated with more working class and poor, mostly Black people. The large working class immigrant community that used to make up much of lower Northwest, that was closer to downtown and the U.S. Capitol, moved out of the city to the suburbs as they were priced out. But not everyone's been able to find a home that they can afford to live in within the city. And that's where the growing homeless population comes from, in part. Gentrification, a lack of inpatient facilities for mental health services, dwindling affordable housing, as even in the poorest areas of the city, a one-bedroom apartment can run you over $1,000 a month. And the public housing waiting list that is still over a decade long for extremely limited numbers of units has created homeless encampments that are not only literally across the street from high-rise luxury condos that are still being built, but that are completed and still vacant, but are also right down the street from the U.S. Capitol, the so-called seat of American democracy and the alleged beacon of freedom for the whole world, but not for the people who are forced to live in tents less than 2 blocks away. They don't have the freedom that the security of a home provides, a safe, warm, and clean place to lay their head. No, they live in fear and the anxiety of homelessness every day in the most powerful city on the planet, just blocks away from the one building in this country that not only contains what may be the largest collection of millionaires or close to it on any given day, but the building from which this country's massive budget is controlled. These people know that they're not budget priorities for the people in the U.S. Capitol. The same is true of the people across the river in the poorest and blackest areas of the city where Sean and I live, where there was little celebration of the inauguration of Joseph Biden because poverty, hunger, and housing insecurity are everyday realities for most people over here, regardless of who is in the White House. The most significant impact the inauguration had on folks in Northeast and Southeast was the difficulty that public transit schedule changes, subway station closures, and the military lockdown of a wide area surrounding the Capitol caused for people who needed to get to work, people who were trying their best to make a living, seeing once again that they pay for actions to protect a government that ignores them and their needs from actions that also had nothing to do with them. From a few locations not far from my own home, the U.S. Capitol can clearly be seen less than 10 miles from any one of those locations, but a world away from the reality that we live in. It is estimated that the Biden inauguration may have cost between $100 and $200 million, which is actually not unusual for inaugurations. The people in the homeless camp and the working class and poor folks in Northeast and Southeast don't expect that Biden's administration will do any more to address poverty and homelessness than any other administration before his has done. So what do we always do? It's what we've always done. We take care of ourselves. We keep us safe. Follow Luqman Nation on patreon.com/LuqmanNation for lots of great content.